This is our first episode of Nightlife, and we got the whole crew here. We're not always going to have the whole crew here, but Nightlife is just an opportunity for us to get together and just sort of informally talk about role-playing games, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, some elements of the campaign, rules, questions, things for the group to ask me, and, we can get real casual with it. Right now, we're just sitting around the table. We just wrapped up our session, so, if anybody has any sort of thoughts fresh on that. In the future, we might take this, COVID restrictions are ending. People are vaccinated. I would love to get this into a bar.
Yeah. And if you watching have comments for Derek, you can obviously leave those below, or for any of us at the nights.
Yeah. Any topics of conversation you really want to see. Again, this is much more casual than anything else. So Bob is now allowed to have his second beer.
Restrainer.
If you watch
the restriction has been lifted.
Yeah, if you watch any of our earlier episodes. So this is more like a podcast style. We're not necessarily doing anything. So the topic of today's Nightlife is Pathfinder 2nd Edition versus 5th Edition, or more specifically versus, other versions of D&D. I know, Matt, I don't think you've played 5th Edition Dungeons and Dragons, but you've played 3rd.
I think I have.
Okay. But you've played 3rd Edition. Tim, I know you have, and I know you guys, have.
I just started in 5e, and I've DM'd him in 5e.
Okay,
correct.
So, yeah, I don't know. There's not really I'm not necessarily the moderator here, but I mean, does anyone
can start that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think starting out, for most people, 5e seems like the optimal choice because it seems easier, or it is easier to get into. But man, I just started. I started playing D&D 5e, and then I started playing Pathfinder 2 very quickly after that. And I think I like playing lower levels, like levels 1 through 10, 1 through 5 campaigns. And for D&D 5e, that is one movement, like one hit, and sometimes you get a bonus action. Sometimes you have to remember that. And I think Pathfinder was simpler in a sense that it's always 3, which is really nice. But I felt like I could do more in a turn. Like I was like, okay, I can do a lot of different things. I can move. I can move, hit, move. I can do a bunch of things. I have 3 actions every turn. It's always easy, always simple. Yes, there's more things to do, which gets complicated because it is a more complicated version of D&D. But I don't know how many times I've ran 5e, and maybe I'm not the best DM, but whenever I ran it, it was like, I move, I hit, I miss, your turn. I move, I hit, I miss. And I'm like, this is so boring. And then some people wouldn't even move. They're like, well, I'm just standing in front of him, miss. Standing in front of him, miss. And I'm like, this is the worst game I've played. And so I don't like D&D 5e, and then I really do like Pathfinder 2e. Sure. I haven't played other systems, like other games, and we've talked about this. It is even D&D 5e the game for starting out.
Yeah.
I
mean, I think it is. I think it's very simple. I think it's, you have one proficiency bonus, and it's you're either trained, you're either proficient or you're not. And if you are, you get the same bonus. And when that bonus goes up, it affects everything. So it's like, and your saving throws are just tied to your 6 ability scores. You don't have like, in Pathfinder, much like, Pathfinder 1 and 3rd Edition and stuff, it's like, okay, I've got my strength, I've got my dex, I got my con, I got my int, but I also have my fortitude save and my reflex save and my will save. It's like, it's all just one thing. So I think undoubtedly 5th Edition, I think it's better for new players. And I say new players in the sense that, like, if you're not a gamer, because Pathfinder 2 has a lot of mechanics.
Yes.
And it has a lot of conditions, and it has a lot of edge cases. And we've been playing it now for, almost 2 years, and I still have to look up stuff all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And here's the thing. You could say, just wing it. You could just make it up. And that's true. That is true. But there's this old saying called the Rule 0 fallacy. This was an old debate that used to happen back on like internet forums. And Rule 0 was this sort of informal rule that, was written into D&D books, which was like, Rule 0 is, you could change the rules anytime you want. It's your game. And so whenever there was something in your game that was like busted or broken, or like they did a poor job designing it, people would say, well, that's not really a problem because you can just Rule 0 it. And people said, well, having the ability to change the rules isn't an excuse for writing bad rules. So what I'm trying to say is, the reason you choose Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the reason why you're playing by these rules, is because you want those bonuses and actions and decisions to matter.
Right.
If you're just going to hand wave them around,
Right.
and
You can have story time and hand wave any edition.
correct, you don't right. In that case, why not pick something that's extremely simple?
Right.
Right. If you're playing Pathfinder Second Edition, it's because you want to count the squares and get the +1 bonus here and get the -2 penalty there, and now I've got a 60% chance of critting, and I crit on a 15.
I think
because
what you sold me on, because we started with 5e. You were my 5e DM.
Yes.
And then you were like, would you want to try this Pathfinder thing? And I was like, I don't know anything about it. It's a little more complicated, but you said, but here's the thing. Every level, you get a feat.
Sure.
And I was like, what? Some levels in D&D, nothing happens.
Actually, a lot of levels you get 2 feats.
I remember us when we were playing 5e, Derek, we were often talking about how it's like, all right, I'm level 5 now, which means I don't get to make any more decisions about my character.
Yeah, and how unfun is that as a player? That you level up, cool. I increase my hit points and
Yeah.
Nothing
else changes.
I got a evasion that level.
Yeah, there's a fair number of levels where you literally, I think, only really gain hit points.
Yeah.
Your proficiency bonus doesn't go up. You don't necessarily get a new ability. And if you do get a new ability from your class, you didn't get to pick it.
Right.
It's just like one of those automatic
Yeah,
abilities.
and especially if you can compare and contrast to like playing an MMO or something like that, where like you level up a bunch of times real quick. But we played for 3 hours and we didn't level up. So we're going to level up maybe next time after 6 hours. And then if all I got was just an increase to my hit points, I'm like,
Yeah.
And I think
not really worth
right,
it.
and that's the tension. That's the difficulty of a role-playing game. Is it has one foot in sort of two different worlds. Because on one hand, it's a game, right? And you play a game because you want it to have ways for you to interact with it, ways for you to fiddle with it, things that you can change and play and make decisions that matter and influence the game. But there's also this role-playing part, and there's a narrative story part to it, which says, well, yeah, you played for 4 sessions and you didn't level up, or when you did, you didn't gain anything, but that's not why you were playing. You were playing because of the cool, epic moments and the cool drama and storytelling that you were doing. And that's true, but it's also kind of not true, right? And it's this weird tension. And I can definitely feel, I like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'm running this game, and we've got this channel. But there are times when I am frustrated with how complex it is for 2 reasons. One, for me as a game master, I don't like to cheat. And the more structured a game is, the more I feel bad if I just kind of hand wave something, right? If the game is loosey-goosey, I don't give a crap. 3 more monsters appear. I don't care. Like the game doesn't really matter anyways. But Pathfinder has rules and they're balanced, and it's actually really well designed, and I like to respect that. That means I have to put in more work. But the other thing is, when I'm playing with people who are newer to the game or people who are seasoned veterans of the game, it's still like, okay, yeah, no, we got that wrong, or we got to flip through a rule book and we got to look it up. It could be daunting, And we're playing with a lot of advantage. We got these decks of cards for all the conditions, and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot to manage.
Absolutely is, but it also gives you that nice uniqueness to it too. We're being able to select what skill feats that you enjoy. It makes it more personalized because you're building not just a character, but you're living it, and it's like real life. If you don't like a skill set or you want to learn a skill set, you're gonna go and learn it. Hey, and I want to learn how to fix my car. I'm gonna go learn it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I think the character customization is probably the biggest draw to Pathfinder.
Huge.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
You get to make a ton of mechanical choices for your character, right? Because you could be playing a game where there's 2 stats, right? Like hot and cold. That's it. Those are only 2 stats. And you could build a character incredibly high. How? Well, he got married. He became the mayor of a town. He saved the village from the fleet of dread pirates. None of that has anything to do with your stats. You're still building a character. I'd argue you're building a more interesting character. But there is the game element. And Pathfinder 2 sways that needle towards the game element. And I think some people believe that can be to the detraction of storytelling and to the detraction of role-playing. Because when you have so many numbers on your sheet, it's harder to think about more like, what would my character think in this moment? What would my character feel in this moment? Again, role-playing isn't talking in a funny voice. And when people talk about, as a pet peeve of mine, when people are like, oh, it was a role-playing
He's about to get angry.
Yeah. When people are like, oh, it was a role-playing encounter, I go, oh, you mean every encounter in the game? because you're playing a role-playing game.
Yeah.
Right.
You are not that person.
Yeah.
So you're role playing.
Guess what? That combat encounter, that was a role-playing encounter. You know why? Because you're playing a role.
Yeah.
Yep.
Your character's role and everything your character did was the role it played.
So in the last session that we just played, Matt talked about how at the beginning of the fight, his positioning with Burl was a little off because, he was more forward and eager to get into the action. That may not have been tactically advantageous, but it was what his character would do. That's the essence of role-playing. Had nothing to do with talking in a funny voice. Had nothing to do with talking to the innkeeper. That's role-playing, right? So, yeah, you can role-play just fine Pathfinder 2. You can role-play just fine in GURPS. You could role-play just fine in any game.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're sitting there trying to juggle 13 different status effects, it can be a bit overwhelming.
Absolutely.
But it makes the game part of it, I think, a lot more
Right.
intriguing. And, there's nothing wrong with liking video games. There's nothing wrong with liking complex board games.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason why your RPG game can't be like that too. And so 5th edition's pretty stripped down. I admit I don't think I would want to run a full 20 level 5th edition game. So part of the reason I chose Pathfinder 2nd edition was that I thought it would be more interesting to see these characters through the lens of Pathfinder 2nd edition than 5th edition.
Yeah, and it sold me, and then I was like, all right, let me see how many friends I can get that we can play this at the beginning. When we were not even thinking about filming, we were just like, what's the next thing we're going to do after D&D? And Derek's like, well, there's this more complicated system, which I think might be right up your alley. And I was like, it kind of sounds really nice.
Yeah. It's not practical because the game is out of print and the online part of it has been shut down. I personally think, do you know where I'm going with this?
4th edition, baby.
Yeah,
DDO is gone, but
I think you guys would have loved 4th edition.
I know I
the
loved
more
it.
video
And
game-like.
ironically, to Derek's point about the role playing, my most role played character was from 4th edition.
That's true. Everyone.
And hands down, that is the most mechanical and tactile mini battle version of Dungeons and Dragons out there.
Absolutely.
Like 100%.
Right. I mean,
and that was still my most role played character.
yeah, absolutely. With like a ton of story and a ton of
Yeah.
character world building and incredible plot lines and stories of
Yep.
revenge and building empires and overthrowing other gods.
Oh,
and,
yeah. I mean, by the end of the campaign, small spoiler alert, he became 2 different gods.
That's correct.
So,
you were the god of secrets
and death. Yes.
Wow.
Yes, that is correct. Because
Mind-boggling.
part of that is because we did kill Vecna, the god of secrets.
That's
so,
true. Now, Matt,
but that's another story
Matt,
for another time.
You played 4th edition.
Yeah, I didn't
But
like
then
it
you
as
quit.
much. Yeah.
Come on.
Matt played with us levels 1 through 10
I heard this story.
and then left the campaign, or 11, and then left the campaign and only came back for the final
final battle.
episode.
Yeah. For me, it felt a lot like I really liked 3rd edition and 3.5,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mhm.
4th edition felt sort of like Disney has now purchased, your franchise that you're into. So you're like, all right, it's all going to be PG-13. No one's going to die. Everything's going to be very like showmanship, fancy.
Mm.
I'm gonna like, and it made it feel like even like warrior fighters or whatnot are like, well, they're spellcasters now because now you've got to choose all these maneuvers, which are spells, but they're not really spells. But you're like, I do the flurry of this thing and make an attack.
So how do you
and
feel about
things.
Pathfinder 2nd edition then?
I really like it. I mean, at least from my perspective as a sorcerer, like,
Sure.
I don't know if I enjoy the monk like Danny was playing,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like Wolfjaw and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, but I really like Pathfinder because for me, Pathfinder 2 is very similar to what at least I think of for D&D 3rd edition or 3 and 4.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, so Pathfinder 2 is a evolution of Pathfinder 1, and unlike Wizards of the Coast, pays out continue to evolve that chassis instead of just kind of like rewriting it and redoing it. So there's definitely the heart of the element of Pathfinder. I think the biggest thing for me is for the Pathfinder 2 is you add your level to things.
Mhm.
Right? So you add your level to your skills, you add your level to your armor class, and so do the monsters. So what this means is that if you guys were to fight a level 3 monster, right, its AC might be like 17. So like you'd hit it on like a 1. And if you were to fight a level like 13 monster, you would need a 20 to hit it. So it very much, it constrains the type of stuff that you can throw at the party.
Mhm.
Because if it's too powerful, they have no chance in hell. No chance. And if it's too weak, it's not even a threat on the radar, right? And so 5th edition's famous for having what they call the flat math, right? And the bounded accuracy, meaning at first level, your fighter might have like a +6 to hit. And then at 20th level, he might have like a +10 to hit, give or take. I mean, I know our 5th edition campaign.
I have to forget all knowledge about our own personal game to remember how it actually functions. But
we our buddy ran a 5th edition game. It started off on
very gritty,
very
darkest
gritty.
dungeon, torchbearer, if you're familiar with that system.
Yeah, and then it quickly turned into like anime wushu.
Yeah, Final Fantasy 14 meets TTRPG.
Yeah,
like I mean, we were stacking inspiration. We could each carry 4 that were ultimates.
Yeah,
it was a thing.
It was a really complicated, crazy thing. But point is like in a standard 5th edition game, your armor class, your to hit roll does not change much
I don't like that.
from level 1 to 20. And that means that when you're like level 10, if a group of, orcs shows up, they could still hit you. They're still a threat, or vice versa. If you're like level 2 or 3 or 4 and a level 8 monster, like if you're level 3 and a level 8 monster in Pathfinder came across your path,
we're in trouble.
I don't think you could win.
No, you run like hell and hope it doesn't want to murder you.
Whereas like in 5th edition, you have somewhat of a chance because you can hit it.
Right. I also like the system in Pathfinder with the +10 to crit.
No, that's
just the 20 crit.
That part is sweet.
Yeah, 3
Absolutely.
actions and the +or-10 are probably my 2 favorite things from PF2E.
Yeah, I agree.
And what sold me on the edition.
I completely agree.
I think, I
completely
do think sometimes PF2E is a little too complicated. But I still prefer that over 5e, which I think is not nearly complicated enough. When pretty much everything just gives you advantage or disadvantage, I get a little bored with the, combat portion of it. And I play these kinds of games, like these specific editions, because I enjoy the complicated combat and, working with my party members and, casting fun spells, debuffing, doing all these crazy super metagamey things. I love that kind of thing. That's what PF2 does, but it does make me sad when, you have to realize, just some weird nuanced rule that's based on the incapacitation tag, but then it's buried like 3 references deep in the book. And like Derek said, just use the internet to find.
Yeah, and why isn't grease flammable?
But we're always learning those things.
Right.
And
well, so
it's
that
wild.
So that gets into this concept, which is sort of more of an OSR thing. That's old school Renaissance. That's like people who play D&D like the way it was back in the 70s. And there's 2 camps, which is your game engine attempting to be a balanced game, or are you trying to simulate a reality? Right? Another way of this is sometimes referred to as combat as war and combat as sport. So when you think of a combat, is it more like a sport game, or it's like, here are your rules, here are my rules, and we're evenly matched? Because it's going to make for a good sporting event, and it's going to be a close one, and it's going to be a nail biter? Or is it combat as war? Where like in war, it's like
no rules.
I showed up with 1,000 people. Well, I only have 100 people. Okay, well I'm just going to destroy you.
Sucks
right?
to be you.
Or like in combat as war is, hey, instead of fighting those monsters, how about this? All right, I'm going to do a thing. We're going to do this thing, and we're going to lure them into the valley, and then we're going to be actually secretly up top, and we're going to roll boulders down on them and just kill everybody. Okay, cool. And it's like, okay, what happens? Yeah, they all die. Okay,
Sweet.
but where was your epic, cool fight in the valley? No, we just rolled boulders down on them.
Yeah.
Man.
Just crushed them.
Yeah,
We just
literally.
crushed them.
That's
That
like logic to me, though.
that's combat as what they would call combat as war, where you're treating combat like you would if it was like real. Like, no, I'm not going to fight evenly. No, I'm going to seek out every advantage I can.
Why would I fucking 300 hot gates this when I could just teleport on top of that mountain?
So very
or
famously,
walk up a stairwell with invisibility cloaks upon the
Yeah.
Why would
party.
I fight all these dumbass monsters?
right, exactly. Now, to be fair, the reason why some people made comments about Gwildor casting Invisibility Sphere and you guys bypassing a bunch of the encounters on your way up to the top is because in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, that really wouldn't work that way. Because just because you're invisible does not mean that you are automatically stealthy.
Right.
Things can still hear you. They can still maybe even perceive you. Maybe they can't see
Understandable.
you, but they could still like see that you're leaving tracks and disturbing curtains or whatever.
But it's not understandable that my stealth check goes up if I'm standing next to a tree, but it does not go up at all if I am completely invisible to everyone around me.
Another great example is combat as war versus combat as sport, and why during our last session I made the ruling that I did. And the ruling was Bob was immobilized and and Burl threw a fireball at his teammate. He was surrounded by enemies. He wasn't just attacking his. And Bob you said, like, do I get a penalty to my reflex?
The first thing I thought of was, I can't move.
Yeah, right.
This should,
and
I can't do anything.
Now here's the thing. In combat as a sport, you say, no, there are rules. The rules exist for these reasons. And no, you still get a save.
Mm-hmm.
Combat as war would say, no, you're just hit, man. You take the full damage, right? Because like, that's just me making a ruling. But when you're playing a game with more structured rules, now you're not playing more like you can trust that the DM is going to follow the rules too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like a game of Mother May I, right? Where in some of the older school games, there weren't really rules for anything. And so you were just kind of like, this is my crazy idea. And it was up to the GM to think about it and say, sure, or no.
Yeah, and that reminds me of like superhero movies whenever they have a speedster, because every time I watch those movies, I'm like, well, the speedster should just beat everyone and no questions asked, and that's the end of the movie. But they can't do that because oftentimes it's difficult when the characters are doing things. You're like, well, why didn't they just use him to run around and knock everyone out? And that's where like one of our earlier times, the first time I played with Kel, where like two things come to mind. Where people
Kel was your half orc.
He was a half orc barbarian. He wasn't super smart,
from third edition.
Yeah. And two things that come to mind that relate to that is one where people were charging in the mountain, and like we were in a forest area and they were coming towards us, and I didn't have anything to do, so I was just like, I'm going to chop down a tree and have it fall like directly on people running towards us. And like that does, I don't know what kind of damage, but just like, yeah, that's a better move. Or the better example I have is when, we had downtime and we're like, what do you do for the next 6 months? And I'm like, I just do push-ups. I'm going to increase my strength by just doing push-ups, so I'm stronger.
All right.
So I can hurt more.
So right there, this is how you can create, this is how you create immediate cognitive dissonance. All right. You're playing Pathfinder. All right. You just experienced that, Gwildor was trying to heal somebody, and he's trained in medicine. So, you guys, let's say you beat this adventure, and then it's like, okay, well, you guys have a couple months. What are you going to do? And Tim goes, I'm going to spend every day of that month, of those 4 months, 6 months if I have to, and I will spend 2 gold every day to train with the best doctors in the land to become better at medicine.
And I will not become better at medicine.
well, okay, but did you level up?
Right.
No.
Did you retrain something?
Okay, then no, you can't.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, you're right. All right, I retire from adventuring, and I become a doctor, and I'm going to dedicate my life to saving people. All right, do I ever get better at medicine? No.
Nope.
You didn't level up.
You don't
Sorry.
have
So
class
do you see Bob breaking?
Yeah.
Do you see his
right?
Do you see his do you see his mind exploding?
I feel like you should be able to do that.
Right.
Well,
but
okay,
but then why would you adventure?
Right. And then why wouldn't you just be an elf and be like, all right, well, I'm 200 years old and I have straight 18s in every single stat, and I am a master in all exotic and martial weapon proficiencies and an expert spellcaster in all traditions, because I've been studying that for the last 200 years, and humans can do this in like 10.
True.
Hell yeah. Where's that
I get
campaign?
that.
So,
So yeah, I mean,
But obviously, we start a game at level 1, so you're not starting at 200-year-old elf. You're starting a game at
a 200-year-old elf could be level 1.
Yeah.
whatever. But
okay. Let's say that you have a party of elves, and after the first couple of adventures, they've gotten a nice chunk of change and money.
Mm-hmm.
More than any normal common or peasant. And they go, hey. And you're like, oh, what are you going to do? You going to go buy really expensive runes for your weapons? And they go, nah, we're just going to go like train in town for the next 200 years. We live to be like 900, 8,000 years old.
Yeah. We'll still be young adults by the time we're done learning all of this.
But
max everything.
You don't
out
even
and
have to be an
totally
elf, right? If someone trains for months or years,
yeah,
they don't get better.
Perfection.
I don't like that.
Well, then you don't like role-playing games.
I know.
Because at the end of the day, it's still a game and it has a rule system.
Right. But
I feel like you could break that down to a rule system, saying that you're, I did push-ups for 4 months. I'm going to try to train to be stronger. Okay, the ruling is,
and you know what?
It takes 1 year to get 1 point stronger.
I bet there is a system out there that does that,
but it's not Pathfinder 2.
Oh,
I agree
with that.
And it's not 5th edition.
That's right.
And it's not 3rd edition. And it's not 4th edition, right?
But I don't mind that idea.
Right.
Right. Well, no, agreed.
As long as there's rule bounds.
I think Derek and I say this a lot. There's an edition out there for what you actually want to do.
Yeah.
If you don't want super crunchy and all these rules, don't play Pathfinder 2. There's plenty of stuff that'll get you where
If you want a very crunchy mechanical rules experience, again, there is nothing about it that is pro or anti role playing.
Right.
At all.
It just happens to have
a
very crunchy rule system.
Right, because I have played some of the most intensely mechanical games alive. Tim mentioned 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and had incredible role-playing experiences.
Mhm.
Speeches that literally moved me and other members of the party
As
to
people.
tears. To tears. Okay?
Damn.
Like,
We need to get
wow.
on some of
William
that.
Brandis was no joke.
Yeah, William Brandis was no joke, okay? I remember at the end of a Dragonlance 5th edition game, which used the Saga system, which uses a hand of cards instead of dice. Mike Babuter gave the most impassionate, beautiful farewell speech to his party I've ever heard in my entire life. Okay. Now, both those games are polar opposite. One is called it's called the Saga Dramatic Narrative Storytelling Game. And the other one is 4th edition D&D, which is like D&D tactics.
Yeah.
Minis and tactics. But it doesn't matter. So role playing you can do anywhere. It really comes down to is, do you want to have a lot of mechanical choices? Now it comes with a cost. Thick rules, lots of feats to read through. If you're not big into the rules, you don't like mechanics, you're fine just rolling 2d20 and taking the best or taking the worst with advantage or disadvantage, I'd say play 5th edition.
That's right.
The other thing to consider, this is not as much. I know we're playing in our main channel, we're playing Rise of the Rune Lords. I know there's a lot of DMs out there these days that do not make their own campaigns and they do not run their own adventures. So you have to consider what kind of adventures you want to run. Do you want to run the 5th edition one adventures, or do you want to run the Pathfinder adventures? And then the most important one, and I hate to say this one, I guess I'm spoiled. My whole life, I've always been surrounded by friends who play role-playing games. And I've never had a problem getting actually multiple groups going if I wanted to. In fact, I run 2 games
You
right
run
now.
2 games right now.
For a lot of people, that is a problem. And I never really realized this until like the internet, and Reddit over the last like 10 years. How many people struggle to find a game, or they want to play but no one game masters, and they end up having now to play online, and they're playing with strangers. And that's just such a weird thing to me.
Especially online. Like strangers, like a pickup game at Gen Con or something is one thing, but then like playing with strangers, but then also online.
And I think we've seen this. I think we've seen this in our comments too. A lot of people want to play Pathfinder 2nd edition. It's hard to find a game. 5th edition is the 9,000-pound gorilla in the room.
Yep.
You're going to have a much easier time finding a 5th edition game. Now, we're lucky here because I knew the system and I own everything. So,
I'm also very convincing to get people to play.
That's true, Bob. That's
Weirdly convincing.
That's Bob's way of saying he's really persistent and annoying.
That's right.
And so I think if you're looking for a game, you sometimes have to think, you're like, I want to run a campaign. Well, if you don't have a group of players ready to go, you may have to play 5th edition just because it's much more easier. And there's a lot of people, I don't know what it is about 5th edition D&D. I do not know what it is about 5th edition D&D, but it has a player base that is like RPG and D&D 5e are synonymous to them. Like it's like if you go down south, they call all sodas or all pop, they call them Cokes. They're like, let me get a Sprite Coke. Let me get a root beer Coke or whatever. They just call them Coke. It's like a generic term, but we do that, right? Kleenex instead of tissue, Xerox,
Band-Aid.
Band-Aid. Some people just don't think there are role-playing games outside of 5th edition. And
I think it's more of
so many.
I think it's probably more of a factor of D&D players than 5th edition players. Because I think like just D&D is like, that's the brand. That's the big one.
Yeah, but I'm just saying there's a lot of people who don't want to play a different game. They don't want to learn a different game. They've invested in one game. They don't want to learn a different one. And so when you say, hey, we should play this game, and they go, eh. And I know.
I want to play Blades in the Dark. I'm hearing good things about that game, and you're playing it.
Oh, we're getting so many people hooked on drugs.
Blades in the Dark is fun times, that's for sure.
I've heard the stories because me and Derek talked about it, but I'm like, if there's a game I like to venture. Again, I played Magic, and then I was like, Rory, who used to play with us, was like, you should play this 5e. And I was like, all right, well, I know Derek DM, so I started playing them. Like, this is really fun. And then Derek's like, well, maybe you should take a next step. Pathfinder 2e. This is really fun. Now I'm like, I kind of want to do all these games I've never heard of. Like,
I would love to do
Cut to
Masterminds again. That would be so fun.
I would play that too. Because
we just finished up a music.
Cut to next
Nice.
year, Bob's playing LARPing, and he's just like, 2 damage.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap that up. We're getting on here, and Nick, you got to get going. So, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of The Nightlife. Again, if you have thoughts or questions about Pathfinder 2 or 5th edition, share them below. We'd love to get a conversation going. But I think there's pros and cons to both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're looking for I think the overall experience is if you're looking for something a bit crunchier, a bit more involved, Pathfinder 2nd edition. But there are some definite advantages to 5th edition. Its popularity makes it easier to find a game. And for some people, the simpler rule set can be a draw.
Yeah, it's easier to get into.
Especially if there are a lot of new GMs getting into the game along with everyone else.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
It's hard enough to run a game on top of trying to learn this rule system as well. And then there's the adventures. If you plan on just using the store-bought adventures, do you want to run, Waterdeep Heist, Dragon Heist? Do you want to run Horde of Dragon Queen? Do you want to run?
I want to run all those in Pathfinder 2.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's just too much work.
I know. I
or
have a lot of these.
Or do you want to run like Age of Ashes or
I want to run that too.
Extinction Curse? We're playing Abomination Vaults.
This is pretty fun too.
Jade Phoenix or Ruby Jade Phoenix or whatever just came out. So if one of those types of adventures appeals to you more than the other one, you can do that one too. So that's kind of my general take on it. So
yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up for this week?
Last call.
Yeah.
All right.
Good to go.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of Nightlife, and we'll see you guys again next week.